Now I'll give a brief introduction to the various levels of consciousness: ignorance, transcendental consciousness, self-realization, God consciousness, and unity consciousness. These are states of ignorance. We are identified with the me, sense of me up here. We have the outer world, the inner world, and the self with a capital S. There's total ego identification. We're semi-conscious about the inner world, and we're unconscious about the more subtle levels and absolutely unconscious about the self. In other words, we think we are what we identify with, or thoughts, or feelings, or physical body, or desires, and so on. A more subtle state of ignorance is the I amness. I illustrate this by making the blob white inside. It's not as contracted as over here where it's a black blob. We're still identified with the me. We're still semi-conscious about the inner world, but we've come to a realization that we are. We're an I that is. Not something that is this or that, but simply that we are. We are a being, a spiritual being. It's still not enlightenment, because there's still the I-ness, the I thought, intact. The I thought exists here, this line, and we're totally unconscious about the self. So two states of ignorance. As we progress further, we can achieve what we call transcendental consciousness. We're still identified with the me, but we've had an experience of the self, but we're not established in the self. So we sort of go down from here, down here, and up here again, and we have an experience that we are not the I amness, which I illustrated in the previous diagram, but that we are pure void, pure being, not being an I or being something, but just being. Now, as transcendental consciousness grows, it can develop into self-realization. The I thought disappears. We realize we're not this me-ness, the sense of being something, but we are the self, with a capital S. The self cannot be described because it does not have any qualities at this stage, at least. Later it becomes bliss and love and devotion. But in self-realization it's pure void, pure nothing. It's empty, void. You're a permanent witness to the not me. The me up here, which still exists but is not you. You have realized that you are the self. Self-realization. As self-realization develops, you can reach what we call God consciousness. The self begins to penetrate through the I-ness down here into the unconscious, up to the conscious level. And you realize that the I up here, which I called the me in the previous diagram, is actually Shakti. Now, what is Shakti? Shakti means energy. But it's not just any energy, it's the divine creative potential of the self. So it is at one and the same time unmanifest, void, yet a creative principle. And it's love and bliss and devotion. In God consciousness, you begin to sense this Shakti in and as everything around you. You realize that you are this Shakti, and you realize that the Shakti you sense in everything around you is the same Shakti. So you develop an immense level of devotion to God in everything as Shakti. Now Shakti can take on many forms, so we have the many forms of God. If you're predisposed to Christianity, it might be Virgin Mary or Jesus. If you're a Hindu, it could be Kali or whatever. It's still Shakti in one of her many forms. God consciousness is supremely blissful. And you're full of love and longing for God, for the divine. You cry a lot of love and longing. It's very joyous. It's also torturous in a sense that you sense you're separated from your beloved. Some choose to remain in this state because the love is so intense and joyful. And they don't want to move on to unity consciousness. In unity consciousness, this vague barrier down here has disappeared. You realize that the Shakti is the self, the I is the self, and the outer world as Shakti is the self. So where you in God consciousness looked at a statue of Virgin Mary, for example, and you felt deep love, here you look at the same statue of Virgin Mary and recognize yourself in it, as it. Now this is not to say that you are the Virgin Mary, but it is to say that you realize that the Shakti, the state of being, is one and the same. It's the same divine principle working in these gods that is working in you. Hence its unity. It takes a long time to go from ignorance to unity consciousness. It sounds very simple when we illustrate it in these diagrams like this. Self-realization comes in a snap. You might go in and out of it, or you obviously go in and out of it in transcendental consciousness, but at some point the I-ness snaps, the I-thought snaps, and you merge with the unmanifest and you're self-realized. There's no way back because the ignorance that kept you separate is now gone. There's no way back. Now that does not mean it's a trap. You won't regret it, don't worry. God consciousness goes up and down. It's more like a phase than a state like self-realization. Unity consciousness also goes up and down in intensity. And then we have a stable phase. I haven't illustrated that because it's very similar to unity consciousness. It comes in a snap also. It's called Sahaja Samadhi. Sahaja means natural, spontaneous, and Samadhi means union with the self. And there's no way back from Sahaja Samadhi, which is to say you're in permanent, stable unity consciousness. There's no fluctuation anymore. Now, the mind can still be active, more or less active, but within you are stable in the realization that you are the one. In God consciousness, there's still a sense of duality between you and the divine. In self-realization, you might consider it the pure non-duality, but it's not. It's not non-duality. It's non-duality within, not without. It's non-duality within, but without there's plurality. But since you have realized non-duality within, you extrapolate, so to speak, the realization onto everything outside of you and understand that since you are non-dual within, everything is also non-dual. But it's not a living perception. Not yet. Now this is a big trap because many non-duality teachers teach that it's the final goal they have reached, but it's not. It's actually a pity to call self-realization non-duality. Unity consciousness is non-duality. Sahaja Samadhi is non-duality. Transcendental consciousness is very much duality. Self-realization is, as I said, duality without and unity within. God consciousness is unity within, duality between you and God and everything as God. So it's proper duality. There's only two. There's you and God. And in unity consciousness, you merge with the God. So that's real non-duality. I hope this makes things a little clearer for you, what the levels of enlightenment are.